Welcome to round 13 of the Women's Candidates. We are nearing the end of the event, and every day the stakes get higher and higher. Today we are taking a look at the game between Bibisara Assaubayeva and Anna Muzychuk. They were both at 6.5 points coming into this round, just half a point behind the leaders. Their head-to-head score was interesting. They made a draw in their first game in the Candidates, and Anna had one more win than Bibisara in classical chess, while Bibisara leads 5-2 if we include non-classical games. But still, I feel like all the stats disappear when there's such a decisive game, so it really depends on the nerves and who just plays better that day. So let's see who it was today. The game starts with Bibisara as white. She begins with e4. She has been switching between e4 and d4 throughout the event. And Anna plays e5. She has been preferring e5 throughout the tournament, so no surprise here. It continues with knight f3, knight c6, and d4, the Scotch game. Bibisara has never played the Scotch game before, based on the database, but it's a well-known opening with a lot of interesting lines, and I really like it as white too. We went into one of the main lines with pawn takes, and knight to f6. Bishop c5 is another main line, but in the game, and it shows knight f6. White took on c6, b takes c6. This is the main line so far, but now an interesting deviation. Bibisara plays queen to e2. The usual main move is e5. This is actually what Divya played against Anna in round 1 of the Candidates. It ended in a pretty uneventful draw, but the main line would go queen e7 pinning the pawn, queen e2 gets rid of that pin, then the knight moves, c4 kicking it out, although h4 is also an interesting try, and usually this c4 pawn gets pinned by the bishop, and then these positions look pretty dynamic, and they're really interesting to play, but they're unfortunately very well known and probably not what you want to play if you want to shock an experienced e5 player like Anna. So in the game queen e2, I thought was really unusual and probably inspired by the main line, but not quite wanting to go into it to create that little surprise. The other main move was bishop d3, but these are known to be pretty drawish as well. Here, Anna took a think and played a human move that tries to transpose to the main lines. Queen to e7. But the computer says there's a lot of moves for black. Play bishop here, rook b8, anything. The engine is okay with anything. But it makes sense to want to go into the familiar territory, which is what she tries to do. But Bibisara wasn't going to transpose into the main line with e5. She prepared knight c3. This position is equal, but the opening surprise kind of worked. Anna played d5. This has been the most played move by black in this position. It's humanly understandable because that's one of black's main plans, but it already gives white a tiny, tiny little edge. White takes, and Anna thought for 6 minutes here and made a surprising decision. She took back with the knight, which left these pawns to be weak long term, and that's what happened in the game, so we'll come back to it. C takes d5 looked very natural, but to be fair, there was a reason for concern here. Most likely, she was afraid of knight b5. Now there's a problem with the c7 pawn. If the king moves to protect it, then white can calmly play bishop e3, long castle, and then attack however much they want. So quite unpleasant. But if the queen's trade, then the same problem remains. So if black wants to protect it, they should move the king over. And then bishop f4, and white is really gaining momentum, attacking that pawn, gaining development. And I would say this endgame is also very, very unpleasant and better for white. So that's why she plays knight d5 instead. Although these pawns are weak, it's still not critical because white needs to prove that they're going to be a weakness and they need to find valid ways to attack them. So white should be only slightly better. Bibisara instantly plays bishop to d2. This is correct, and you don't want to trade these knights, but at the same time you want to develop, protect your own knights, so this move makes a lot of sense. Bishop g4 from black, defining the queen's position a little bit, so it gets kicked away. And this was finally the moment that these queens have been staring at each other for so long, they finally get traded. From here on, I would think both of them are out of theory and in a rather unfamiliar position. I would say the opening was a success for white because although the queens are off the board, there is a very clear weakness that white can attack, which is these two pawns, while white honestly has none of the weaknesses that can be that easily attacked. She plays long castle. Long castle by black was also possible, and likely this would have saved black from what happened in the game, but even this is a bit unpleasant because white has those better piece placement and those weaknesses that they can attack. In the game, Anna goes bishop e7. Looks very calm. The king is going to castle soon and has no danger, but there is a forcing sequence of moves. Knight takes d5 first. She took back with the pawn, which black has been wanting to do for a very long time. But just a note on bishop d5. There was a pretty deep idea here. Not sure if Bibisara would have played it. But there's bishop a6, which is very interesting. The bishop wants to play bishop b7, of course, if that bishop ever moves. That would be great. But the even deeper idea is that it protects that c8 square. So once black castles, bishop f4 suddenly attacks this pawn and the rook cannot defend it. There's a huge advantage to white now because black's pieces are just paralyzed. It's unclear how to defend this pawn. Probably bishop d8, but the piece harmony is really not there. The rooks are not connected, and soon that bishop can get kicked out and white can even try to win that pawn. So this was not an option. And c takes d5 is logical too. Now Bibisara goes bishop b5 check, and suddenly that king needs to decide what to do. This was a critical moment to think how to even deal with that check. Either cover with the bishop or move away. She ended up covering with the bishop, but king f8 was also an option. And here one of the issues is that the rook is not really coming out. So bishop c6 can happen, and then bishop f4. So even though these pawns are not doubled anymore, they still continue to be targets, and it's quite annoying. Black trying to defend it doesn't work because bishop back to e3, and both pawns are attacked. So still, even though not a lot of pieces, a lot of tactics somehow appear. But black has some defenses with g5 and some ideas of rook c8. But white also doesn't have to take on c7 here, to be fair. So king f8 was an option. Maybe that could have even been better than what happened in the game. But let's see. Bishop d7. And here's where it's one of those good moments where if you want to challenge yourself and try to find the move yourself, this is the chance. You can pause the video and try to guess. I quite liked the idea that Bibisara played in the game. So guess it yourself. And the move is rook h to e1. So we're keeping that bishop undefended. The other option, we can start with the simple takes. This would not have led to much for white. Black doesn't have any problems, well, minor problems that can be solved with something like king c6, but bishop d7 doesn't really lead to all that big of an advantage. Bishop a6 is also okay, but c6 is pretty solid. So rook h to e1 is really that tactic that white needed to keep the advantage on their side. Taking the bishop is forced, otherwise black is completely pinned. And now bishop to b4. This is the plan. We gain back the bishop through that pin. Now there's only one saving move for black, which Anna found in the game. It's long castles. Short castles gives a much worse version of it because Black loses a pawn immediately with rook d5. So at least long castle protects that pawn, but not for long. Rook e7. It's one of those very unfortunate situations where I feel as black, you look at it and you only now realize how dangerous this actually is. There's rooks, there's opposite colored bishops, and the pawn structure looks fine, but it's not possible to defend it. This rook is so strong, attacking everything. This pawn is also weak. And in reality, black cannot keep a pawn. Black loses a pawn. If this pawn gets defended, then computer says play b3, but I think bishop a5 is the most natural. So black needs to protect this somehow, and it would lead to something similar as the game. This pawn, cannot get protected in any other way. So the game move, rook d7, is actually the best move. Anna decides to give up the pawn to get rid of that rook and get out of this bind. And this leads to pretty cool endgame. So rook takes, bishop takes, rook takes d5. Objectively, the computer will often say these positions are only a little bit better. But from a human perspective, it's much harder to defend these than it seems. Black does have a few hopes. Opposite color bishop endings, rook endings, trading a few pawns, those are all the good strategies. Definitely still possible to hold. But Bibisara also has twice as much time as Anna. She actually got to this position with an hour and 20 on her clock, which was insane, very quick. And Anna had something like 40 to 45 minutes. So still enough, but for sure more comfortable for the side who wants to push with the extra pawn. Here Anna plays h5, which is generally a good idea in the endgame, but this lets her pawns be a little bit stuck. It's better to play rook e8 and try to play rook e2 immediately, and then after that, if you're going to place the pawns somewhere, then placing them with g6 on the light squares so that the opponent's bishop cannot attack them. h5 in the game ran into bishop c3, and now that pawn is attacked, so it needs to be defended. And she plays h4. The computer is sometimes not a fan of some of these moves, like it says bishop a5 is better, but some of these are very subtle computer lines, and I think in general, as long as white and black comes up with a certain plan, it's still good. Basically, these endgames can be played in many ways, and a lot of these ideas do repeat. So as long as you end up finding the right idea in the end, that's usually what matters. So she plays h4, and then rook c5. From here on, Bibisara tries to make progress, but Anna is defending very well. So although this pawn storm is coming up, it actually didn't achieve much. It has a bishop a5 idea soon, so that's definitely dangerous, but Anna was just in time to trade the rooks. Offering this rook trade, the rook doesn't have much space, so it goes to c6, but now rook d6. White doesn't want to repeat, so needs to accept this rook trade. And if we compare this to the beginning position of that endgame, I would say black made progress. The rooks got traded, and the opposite colored bishops are known to be very high chances for a draw. But making that draw is not always easy, and even all the top players make mistakes in such endings. There's a lot of pawns here, so it still remains complicated. Bibisara advances the king. Here Anna plays bishop e6, which looks very harmless, but that was actually one of the very important mistakes. The reason for that is that now black doesn't get a chance to trade pawns on her own terms. It was important for black to trade as many pawns as possible immediately, and such a move is a6. Here, both white and black can play a lot of different things, so I'll just show a sample line, but there are lots of other options. So the idea here, we traded one pawn, And if our pawn gets attacked, we can even afford to play g5 and sacrifice that other pawn for the sake of just trading as many as possible. And in fact, this position is a draw. That's the power of the opposite colored bishops. White cannot make any progress. No matter where they go around with the king, none of these pawns will ever advance because the light squares are well taken care of. Honestly, it's understandable to not go for this because, of course, none of this was forced. There was a lot of other things to calculate. But that's just an example of how even sometimes you're down 2 pawns, it can still be a draw. But still, she had to start trading these pawns much quicker. But because she played bishop e6, Bibisara went bishop b4, which is an important move, because now black needs to take care of that pawn. If d5, it looks good at first, but it's actually not, because white trades into this. And this one is winning, because the white king has free reign to do whatever it wants, and this pawn is not really a good advantage for black either. And when, the second this king gets in somewhere, this pawn is going to be very hard to deal with. And the other king is struggling to leave because this pawn can become a passer too. So this one would be lost. In the game, she plays king c7. So now the white king advances. And there were some ways to be more precise for both, like king e4 is more precise. But she plays bishop check. And a few maneuvers happen. And here was another moment. Anna plays a6, which is the right idea, and that's all good. But this leaves white the chance to go b6 instead. And suddenly this passed pawn becomes very dangerous. So black's issue here is that one piece will always have to guard this pawn because it's so close. So you can't even spend a couple of moves pawn grabbing or doing something else and then to come back to it. Somebody really has to be there all the time. So for now, she leaves the king there, and white also needs to take care of some pawns, so that's what she does. But now that that pawn is taken care of, white can simply shift all the game to the other side of the board and win there. So for black, one of the pieces has to stay, so the king tries to get involved, but now g4. And that pawn cannot be taken because his bishop constantly has to stay on c8. If black does nothing and refuses to change the pawn structure, that doesn't work either. White can take and soon create another passer on this side of the board. So in the game, she plays g6, but that drops one more pawn. But there was nothing to do at this point. It was already lost, but still. Still tries for a couple more moves, but for now, the passage of the white king is just too smooth. And she threatens to create another passer. Black tries to defend, but it's not enough. And Anna resigns here. It might seem early, but white does have more than enough passed pawns and will probably win another one. So white can simply win the game on the king side because that other bishop cannot move at all. I think it was instructive to see how, first of all, the opening preparation can really guide the game in a certain direction. And another thing was how even these equal-looking games, we know that opposite-colored bishops are easy to defend, but they're really not, and they're very, very tough to hold, especially when there's a lot of pawns on the board. And just how well Bibisara was always putting pressure on the opponent, both in the opening, then in the middle game, and then in the end game. So it's really these small advantages and growing your advantage at each phase of the game that got her the win. And this was a massively important game for the standings. It completely changed everything, and it put Bibisara into the lead. This is because Gurechkin had defeated one of the leaders, Zhu. Vaishali made a draw with Tan Zhongyi, and Katerina Lagno won against Divya. Although the winner of the Open candidates is already decided, which congrats to Sindarov on such an amazing performance. But it's cool to see that the battle for the women's section is far from over. Vaishali and Bibisara are leading with 7.5 points. Zurginer is at 7, and Gorechkina, Muzychuk, and Lagno are at 6.5. So in reality, any of those players could still win. This is because some of them are playing each other, some of them are not. So still any one of them could win, which is really cool. And trust me, the hardest challenge in chess is to win that last round. So I'm super excited to see how it goes, and I hope you are as well. So I'll see you tomorrow for the finale.